Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, greetings from Brussels, and thank you to the Czech government and the Sevro Institute for organizing today's conference. This July, Allied leaders gathered in Washington to celebrate the 75th anniversary of NATO and to make our alliance even stronger, fitter, and more agile for the future. This year also marks 25 years since Czechia joined the ranks of the most successful political military alliance in history. You have been a strong and steadfast NATO ally ever since. Czech soldiers serve in NATO's multinational battle groups, and your pilots conduct air policing missions to protect our eastern flank. You contribute to NATO's peacekeeping missions in Kosovo and our training mission in Iraq, helping foster stability beyond our borders. You are leading a multinational initiative to provide ammunition to Ukraine as they defend against Russian aggression. And you have plans to modernize your armed forces and defense plans beyond 2040 and to spend 2% of GDP on defense. Czechia hosted the informal meeting of Allied foreign ministers this May, and just last month, President Pavel, former chief of NATO's military committee, hosted Allied chiefs of defense also in Prague. At that meeting, General Rugeho underlined Czechia's deep commitment to national and collective defense, and he called on all of us to be more resilient, prepared, resolute, and forward-thinking. That is exactly what conferences like today are designed to do. And that is exactly what NATO is doing on the road from Washington to our summit in The Hague next year. In Washington, we took steps to ensure our security in three important ways: by supporting Ukraine, by strengthening our own deterrence and defense, and by stepping up our partnerships. First, on Ukraine, we confirmed our unwavering support as the Ukrainian people bravely defend their freedom and future. We agreed a substantial financial pledge, more military support, bilateral security agreements, and a new NATO command to coordinate our training and security assistance. Ukraine is now closer to NATO than ever before, and it's on an irreversible path to membership, because as Czechia understands well, there will be no true security for Ukraine without NATO membership, and there will be no true security in Europe without a stable Ukraine. Secondly, we are continuing to bolster our own deterrence and defense. Today, NATO has 500,000 troops on high readiness across the alliance, tens of thousands of combat-ready troops on our eastern flank, and the most robust defense plans since the Cold War that detail how we will protect and defend every ally if needed. These plans are linked to specific capability targets that outline what each NATO country needs to provide for our shared security in terms of forces, resources, and readiness. To meet these targets, it is clear that allies will have to spend significantly more than 2% of GDP on defense. The good news is that we have seen record increases in defense spending across the alliance. The bad news is that this is no longer enough. We must do more to defend and deter against the enormous challenges we face. And to do more, we must spend more, better, and together through NATO. And finally, we are also stepping up our partnerships with like-minded nations near and far, with the European Union, our unique and essential partner, across the Middle East, North Africa, and Sahel to foster stability in our southern neighborhood, and further afield, with our Indo-Pacific partners, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and Korea. NATO's focus remains on the security of the Euro-Atlantic area, but today's threats are global. We face a revisionist Russia and a coercive China. North Korea and Iran are supporting Putin's illegal war, and authoritarian actors are carrying out the largest campaign of hybrid actions across NATO countries since the Cold War. Czechia has seen this firsthand, with Russian operatives causing an explosion at an ammunition storage depot that killed 2 workers, and with the malicious cyber activities your government attributed to the GRU, Russia's intelligence service, earlier this year. these actions are designed to sow fear and divide us. Our best defense is to respond with strength and unity, protecting our security and interests in an increasingly complex world is a team sport. And I know that Czechia will continue to be a strong team player. Together, allies and partners, civilian and military, governments, and the whole of society, we will continue to keep our 1 billion safe. So thank you again for everything you do to strengthen our transatlantic alliance. And I wish you a successful conference. Thank you very much.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be with you in Prague virtually. Unfortunately, I can't be there in person. I'm in Warsaw at the Warsaw Security Forum. But I wanted to take this opportunity to thank the organizers for the invitation and to say a few words about the U.S. elections and the NATO summit and NATO policy generally. First off, concerning the U.S. elections, I just want to provide a little reassurance to our European friends and allies. There is no catastrophic outcome going to come out of the U.S. elections. Both candidates, it's a binary choice between Harris and Trump. Both candidates are going to be supportive of NATO. They're going to be showing some degree of U.S. leadership in the world, but neither is there an ideal outcome here. We're going to have to struggle through regardless of who wins, but it's not going to be horrible. Now, as for the situation in the world, however, it is horrible. We have seen over the past several years an explosion of conflict in the world, starting with a catastrophic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. We then saw Putin's major invasion of Ukraine, which continues to go on. There's been no decisive outcome to this, no decisive support for Ukraine. We've seen the Middle East then grow in conflict as well, with just yesterday Iran launching a massive attack against Israel. We've also seen a degradation in security and democracy in Africa, in Latin America. So the global situation is far worse than it was a few years ago. So when we look at the U.S. election and we look at the binary choice between candidates, I'm afraid that with Vice President Harris, if she's elected, we will have the same strategy, the same general approach toward global conflict, which is to avoid escalation. It is to avoid making things worse, if you will. In my view, that strategy has led to the conflicts that we see in the world today. It empowers our enemies by assuring them that they have nothing to worry about. So that is a continuation of the same. We are safe, we are comfortable, it's not going to be a catastrophe, but it will continue this cycle of conflict. The other side of this would be former President Trump, if he is elected again, where he introduces a great deal more volatility. No one can tell you exactly what he's going to do if elected as president. And he often has harsh words, both for friends and allies, sometimes for adversaries as well. He has in the past taken some very strong stands. For instance, concerning Ukraine, he lifted the arms embargo on Ukraine, complained about the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, but he also continued to have an olive branch outreach to Russian President Putin, which Putin seemed to take advantage of. So that's the scenario from our elections as I see it. But what specifically about NATO? Well, I would argue that, and I'm here in Warsaw at the Security Forum. I've been in several other recent events, including GlobeSec in Prague. There aren't a whole lot of new arguments that I've heard about what should be done. It's more a matter of convincing people to do them. It's more a matter of leadership. And again, as I said, I don't see that changing. But it's time that I think we really consolidate an agenda of things to do at NATO. Concerning Ukraine, let's start with that. The broader issue here is peace in Europe. It is not just about Ukraine's victory. It is making sure that we do not face a situation in the future where NATO countries are attacked or threatened, and we have to respond under Article 5. Right now, we have the luxury of not having to invoke Article 5 because of Russia's war in Ukraine. That could change if Ukraine is defeated. And so we need to look at this as a vital interest of helping Ukraine succeed in order for NATO to do its job of maintaining security of its members and peace in Europe. To do that, there are a few things I think we ought to do right now. Number one, I would like to see NATO convene consultations under Article 4 to address specifically Russia's hybrid attacks against NATO allies that are ongoing. We have cyber attacks, we have interference in our democracies and political processes, we have disinformation aimed at impacting our societies, we have direct corruption and bribery of political forces, we have arsonists, we've had murders committed by Russian forces on the territory of NATO members, we've had paid demonstrations in order to cause domestic unrest, we've had beatings of people such as Leonid Volkov in Lithuania on NATO territory. So all of these things, I think, are cause sufficient for NATO to have an Article 4 consultation about the nature of Russia's hybrid attacks and how we should view them and what, if anything, we should be doing about them. But pretending they're not there is a mistake. Second, also, coming back to Ukraine, we ought to make sure that we are providing Ukraine all of the weapons that it needs and all of the permissions that it needs to use those weapons. Russia is attacking Ukraine relentlessly from Russian territory. There should be no restrictions on Ukraine fighting back. It is a right enshrined in the UN Charter of Self-Defense. As long as they are hitting only military targets, there is no reason to restrict Ukraine's use of weapons. Regarding air defense, we have a situation now where Russia regularly violates Polish and Romanian airspace, and sometimes the airspace of other allies, in order to attack Ukraine. This is a very dangerous set of activity, which has already resulted in 2 deaths in Poland and the attack on a ship in Romania's exclusive economic zone waters. This has to stop. I think the best way to do it would be for Poland and Romania to receive authorization to defend their own airspace and to seek permission from Ukraine to establish an extended air defense zone, say 150 or 200 kilometers over Ukrainian territory, to make sure that there are no dangerous flying objects in that area that could impact NATO countries and NATO population. This would have a great benefit for Ukraine as well, but it would be NATO doing its job of assuring protection of its population, its territory, and its airspace. Third, NATO has not taken any major steps as of yet to guarantee freedom of navigation in the Black Sea. There is more that could be done. Turkey is the vital partner in the Black Sea and should be a leader in working with other NATO allies to ensure freedom of navigation, non-violence, peace on the high waters in the Black Sea, something that Russia threatens every day, but we can prevent. Fourth, former Secretary General Stoltenberg had proposed that NATO establish a fund for Ukraine. This is a very good idea. We face in the United States and in the European Union volatility in our ability to pass tranches of military or other assistance to Ukraine in a timely fashion and in a consistent fashion. This also would have the benefit of establishing a better sense of burden sharing in support for Ukraine militarily within the alliance. If we established a fund, say 100 billion euros, of which was paid for by member states according to existing NATO cost share formulas, such as we use for the civil or the military budget, this would establish a U.S. payment of roughly 20% or 20 billion euros out of that 100, which would be a more fair distribution as seen in the eyes of American politicians, making aid to Ukraine more sustainable. So that is something that we should indeed be looking at NATO, is establishing a fund for Ukraine. And then finally, we need to accelerate the process of bringing Ukraine into NATO. We brought Germany into NATO when it was still divided and Germany still had a vision of unification. We have faced challenges to NATO over time, many, many years. There is a proposal from former Secretary General Rasmussen about bringing Ukraine into NATO in Article 5, applying to the territory that the government controls and not recognizing Russia's occupation of the rest, but not taking it back militarily through NATO efforts. There are ways to do this. And I think not only sending a long-term signal to Putin, but backing it up with Article 5 guarantees to show that we will not allow Ukraine to fail is a very important step that should be taken as soon as possible. This is a very robust agenda for NATO. I don't see either U.S. presidential candidate embracing it right away. At the same time, I do see pressure from both to try to bring about an end to the war and reestablish peace. My argument, and I'll close on this, is that there will not be peace in Europe again unless Ukraine is part of NATO. Putin has now broken the security structure that existed in place. He has shown a willingness to use force to engage in territorial conquest and the genocidal elimination of an entire people. That is something that cannot be tolerated in Europe, and we will face future war and future threats in Europe against others if he is not stopped in Ukraine. So when we see the possibility of stopping in Ukraine, we then also need to add these next steps of a NATO agenda to make peace permanent. And the way you make peace permanent is through Ukrainian NATO membership, strong defense, and a commitment to deter future Russian aggression through the willingness to act. That will reestablish peace on the continent as a whole, something that we need to do as part of any settlement for the war in Ukraine. I'll pause there. I know it's boring to watch videos from people who are not with you in person, so I wish you a very successful and very productive day. Thank you.